Thank you very much. Our next presentation, 11.2, is the Smarter Balanced Assessment SBA Results. And Director of Student Learning, Jason Aillaud, will come forward to present that for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Minor, Board of Directors. I'm here to share with you the results of the Smarter Balanced Assessment and Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science. So something to keep in mind is that the Smarter Balanced Assessment is one measure of students' progress toward college and career readiness. It's an important measure for assessing school and district effectiveness, but it is just one measure out of several. It's required for federal and state accountability and is administered to students in grades 3rd through 8th and grade 10. At grade 10, meeting standard at a level 3 or 4 on the SBA ELA or math can be used to meet a student's graduation pathway requirement. We'll also talk about the Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science, or WCAS. This measures the level of proficiency that students have achieved based on the Washington State 2013 K-12 Science Learning Standards. It's required for federal and state accountability, and it fulfills the federal ESSA requirement that all students be tested in science once at each level in elementary, middle, and high, and it's administered to grades 5th, 8th, and 11th annually. So this chart here shows the participation rates of students who actually took the different assessments. We see in 2024 for the SBA, we were at 92%, which was just slightly down from the year before, 1 percentage point different. Held at the 92% for math, and increased on the WCAS for the science percentage. And you can see that we're actually above our pre-COVID levels for participation on the WCAS. So one thing I think that's very important to note on this slide, just for the sake of anyone who may not be aware, is that the SBA and WCAS are not administered to students in grades kindergarten through 2nd. So we use other metrics to assess students at those grade levels. But this really helps us identify our performance indicators for the students and how they're making progress across these subject areas. So here are the results by grade level, the percentage of students in grades K through 8 who are at or above grade level in reading. So this is the ELA data, and I'll pause to let you look at this chart. And here's the similar results, but for math from the spring 2024.
Just a quick comment. It says percentage of students in grades K through 6, but that's just because that's the performance indicator, but
correct.
K1 and 2 aren't included.
That's correct. Thank you to Dr. Cadens. So here's some comparison data across time. So just a quick note that no testing was given in 2020, and that 2021 has an asterisk because that assessment was actually given in the fall. The blue bars, the kind of bluish gray bars, are Edmonds school district results, and the black line is the state data. So you can see that our scores are slightly higher than the state, but remain fairly steady over the last few years and are below our pre-COVID levels. And this is for ELA. Moving to math, Again, our scores are slightly higher than the Washington State average, but no increase. It held steady from 2023 and are, like with ELA, below the pre-COVID levels. Moving on to science, we're slightly higher than the state, and our scores are consistent with where they were prior to the pandemic. So moving on to district comparisons, we choose the districts that we compare to based on the size, the enrollment of the students, the geographic locations. So you'll see adjacent districts on here like North Shore, Shoreline, Mukilteo, and then the demographics. We try to find similar districts with similar demographics to compare to. So I'll give you a moment and take a look at those comparisons. So you can see we performed above 6 comparative districts and below 4 other on the ELA. And here's the math, and similarly performed above 6 districts and below 4. Here's our comparisons for science. We performed above 5 districts and below 4. And the same as 1. And now we'll move on to the results by federal race and ethnicity and by program. So you can see when you look at this chart that there are gaps of great concern, and they've existed over time. And there's some growth on here. For example, our multilingual learners saw some growth, but the system does have a lot of work to do to close these gaps. Again, those bluish gray bars represent the district, and the lines represent the programs or the federal race and ethnicity. And this is showing us the ELA results. And moving on to math. Again, we can see the results over time. Some programs see slight increases, but again, a lot of work to do to close the gaps between the tops of the bluish gray bars and the federal race and ethnicity and programs in some cases. And then finally moving on to the WCAS, the science measurement. One thing that's really interesting is the number of students who tested versus those who refused the test. So students who did not test effectively score a 0, and that can weigh down the district average. So this slide and the next series of slides will show how our students did who tested without counting those who did not take the test at all. So you can see of the students who tested, 55% met the standard in ELA versus the entire total, including those who didn't take the test at all, brought it down to 52%. In math, we see that those tested, 43% met standard. When we include all, 42%. And then the difference is most striking here in the WCAS for science. And it's important to remember that only 84% of students completed this assessment. And here's where it's, you can tell there's a significant difference. Because of those who tested, 52% met standard, but we include all the students, those who didn't take the test, it brings it down to 45%. One difference for the discrepancy is that the science assessment, the WCAS, cannot be used for a graduation pathway like the ELA and the math assessments, the SBA can. So we have a much lower participation in high school. So some considerations for next steps. We want to look and are investigating relationships to other assessment metrics that can be used for progress monitoring, such as iReady. I'm actively researching iReady and their correlation data. I'm working with iReady itself and with an independent agency to do research on the effectiveness there. Continuing to monitor and improve participation rates overall, as that, as you can see, would have an impact on our scores. We had data chats with each principal, principal supervisor, superintendent minor, student services executive director, and myself. And as you heard earlier from Hazelwood, we are encouraging the use of SBA interim assessments so that students are more familiar with the test structure, the question types, and we can get clear data and information that aligns directly with the assessment these students are being measured on. With that, are there any questions?
Thank you. Comments or questions first from the students? Did you guys, as high schoolers, take the SBA, or didn't need that for your graduation pathway? Just curious.
I think I remember taking the SBA. I'm not using it for my specific pathway. I'm doing a CTE pathway instead.
Yeah.
But I remember taking both of those, and then I remember taking the science assessment as well.
Okay.
Before, as of recent, and I remember that that turnout for that assessment was a lot less, as shown as well, and as seen in person. The turnout for that science assessment was like very, very low compared to what I saw in the past for the other assessments that were pathways.
Thanks, Santiago.
I think I took it a couple years ago, if not last year. I just remember like taking it in 9th grade and a lot of students feeling confused about what they were testing on, and I also think that was because of the gap in COVID and students not learning all the material that they needed to learn for their 8th grade year. So
Interesting. Thank you.
Same with me. If not last year, I remember taking it, and just looking at the questions, I was very confused on what it was like asking me, or like I've never seen those type of questions at school before. So it really confused me, and I think rather than testing me on my ability of like learning, I felt like I was tested to figure out what this question was asking me. So I think to help them like understand like what questions that will be shown up like beforehand, it would be very helpful for them to actually test on their skills.
Yeah, I've taken the SBA test, I think last year, because last year was 10th grade, so yes. And I totally agree with what they said. It was really like the questions, especially on the math, it's like, I don't know what they're asking me to do. It's not that I'm incapable of doing it, but it's that the questions are like phrased in a way that I'm just, like not used to, and is not like a way that I had been asked in classes before, like especially in the math, and even just like the structuring of looking at like the screen is not like the same way that I'm used to like looking at math problems. Like for instance, this might be embarrassing, but I had a hard time finding the calculator on my math test, and because I just didn't know where on the screen it would be, because I had never looked at a screen like that. So I agree with what you guys said. It would be nice to maybe look at something similar before we do it.
Jason, does this district no longer do practice tests with the students?
Well, that's why we're looking into encouraging the interim assessments.
But isn't there a practice test that's a short version that helps them know where all the tools are and what the questions look like and what the format is?
Well, they do a little practice right before they launch into it, but otherwise it would be the interims.
Well, the interims would be useful, but it used to be prior to taking that test, there was a pretty substantial practice test that allowed them to really get familiar with the format and the questions and accessibility tools. So sounds like they didn't have access to that. That could, I mean, that alone could explain some of the depression of some of our scores, because that they need to be comfortable with the test and the whole setup of it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Yeah, I do remember when I was in elementary school. I went to Lewin Elementary, and we would do practice tests and stuff of that manner even before we would take the test, and also like maybe a week before,
Right.
we'd at least log into the system and figure out how to use what and when and where. Specifically, I mean, I remember doing it in 5th grade a lot. But then since then, I don't think we've done that, especially in high school. I haven't done anything of that. I just know how to use it from knowing in elementary school specifically.
Thank you. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to lean into that idea of encouragement to keep on using those interim assessments, because the more they use those interim assessments, the more they'll be able to recognize and understand how they're asking the questions, and where all the tools are that you got to be able to use to be able to show what you know. So, and I mean, all this, all the data is helpful to see. It's obviously not where anyone wants it to be, but the study session that we just came out of was really encouraging to me to see the level of specificity and granularity that you guys are leaning into raising these test scores, improving grad rates, and it's just very impressive, the work that you guys are engaged in now to address this. Thank you.
How long have we been, the SBA been around? Do you know, was it 2008?
It changed formats a couple
I
of
know,
times
that's why I was
in
just
there.
kind of curious about that, if that,
20, it came along with the Common Core standard, so it was 2010.
2010, okay.
But then there was even a format that changed in format since COVID, so it's substantially shorter now
Is it? Okay.
than it was prior.
Yeah, because I know that there's been some history of some of the change, and so I'm just kind of, as we track it and as we're talking about doing some of the, the interim testing and stuff, how we'll see how that changes, so. So thanks.
Directors Gerard and Smith?
I wanted to ask if we have any idea about the participation rates. I can see in high school where students may on their own opt out, but are parents opting the other kids out, or are they just not in school that day?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question, Director Gerard. So we actually changed the way that the assessment was delivered in high school beginning last year, where it actually was incorporated to part of the day. And so that contributed a lot, actually, to the increase in the participation rate from 2022 to 2023. If you look there, you can see that there's a jump. And so restructuring it that way so it wasn't delivered in high schools outside of the school day did contribute to that increase. And we continued that practice into last year as well.
Just to provide a little bit of clarification there, it wasn't delivered outside the school day. It's just that the other students who weren't testing were excused. And so it made it a little more easy for those who perhaps didn't want to test to also feel like they were excused. Our participation rate, yeah, if you look at that chart, we have come up quite a bit there. That's in part because it's not a one and done. We are seeking students out who haven't opted out, pulling them out of other classes if they were absent the day of testing, to have them do a makeup of the test, to be a little bit more deliberate about that.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer.
Director Smith?
As always, this is one of my favorite study sessions we had right before this, because it's one of our most informative. It's definitely, I think, one of the times that we get the best look at data. So I do thank you for not accumulating, but getting all that data together, for there. And so just thank you to guys for that. And I'm excited to see what we look like in the spring as well. because as we continue, I think I said this study session, as we continue to come out of COVID, we're just continuing to get a little bit more towards our baseline, get a little bit better. For me, as someone who sort of came on during that COVID time and seen those super depressed numbers for where we were at in terms of achievement and whatnot, it's just encouraging to see us get back there, even if we're not all the way there yet. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Director Smith.
So thank you for all of this. I know from experience how hard it is to pull all the data together. But it does, to some extent, frustrate me when the data is put together across grade levels for the district, because it masks where there might be interesting trends going on. So in particular, I'd be very interested in if it's, I know you have reduced staff. I understand the reduced resources. Even if it could be in descriptive sentences, I'd be curious to know, for example, what does ELA in the elementary grades look like in each of the grade levels? We've just implemented a new curriculum. It would be very helpful to know, has that had an impact yet to help in ELA? Are there any grade levels in any of these subjects that are doing particularly well compared to the state versus some that are doing not well at all compared to the state? So, on average, we look okay, but that doesn't tell us where, and I know you guys are looking at it, I know you're following up, but it would be very helpful to us as we think about, decisions that we may be making in the future in terms of curriculum or whatever. So, and one other, in terms of the participation rate, would be very helpful to know to what extent, for example, because we know math looked very low at high school, to what extent is that caused by the participation rate more than in other places? Because it's really low. So it would be helpful to know to what extent. I mean, we can see that the percent of kids who are meeting standard is low, but the participation rates were combined across the district. Am I making sense?
I think so. So you're wondering to what extent is the low score in high school math due to the participation rate?
Right. Or are there any others? But I know high school tends to be more that. So as you look through the data by grade level, if you could pull out highlights or lowlights, that would help give us information, but particularly, it would, in the future, for example, we're just implementing this year a new math program at high school and a new science program at high school. If, we're not going to see anything probably this year, but with time, helping us see the relationship between decisions that we make in terms of curriculum and the effect at those grade levels for those subjects after it's been learned and implemented. And that there's program evaluation things going on like that.
Thank you.
That'd be great. But this was very helpful, and particularly the study session earlier. We really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Director
Yeah.
Kadams.